So we are back for Digital Marketing Masterclass. I have the one and only Brian Dainis. You may remember I've had him on the show in the past. CEO of Curotech, tech entrepreneur, and probably one of the smartest minds I've come across in the 20
man.
years. Yeah, we have no problem talking tech, talking AI, talking shop, talking entrepreneurship. You are a fountain of knowledge, and it's really cool. I think you found me. I remember you coming out to the office and we were just trading stories, and I was like, man.
Yeah, someone introduced us. I forget who, but I lived in Conchi at the time, so I was like, man, how do I not know this guy already?
Yeah, very cool, very cool. But I'm glad we did. We've remained friends ever since, and pretty much any time anything comes up, I usually shoot Brian a text and was like, hey, what do you think about this? Because he's almost always ahead of the curve. And so, what do you got going on right now? What's keeping you busy?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, obviously Curotech's my primary focus, but I'm really diving into, I've been re-immersing myself in coding again. It's been like I've been in CEO mode for the last, 5-6 years. And so I'm getting back into coding. That's been awesome. Laravel's my weapon of choice for software frameworks. So I've been diving deep into the latest in the Laravel ecosystem.
Okay.
And definitely into OpenAI. I've got a few business ideas rather, not official companies or anything, but just business ideas around leveraging GPT-3 and GPT-4, which will be hopefully released soon this year.
Yeah. So I got an argument, and I'm alone on this. I don't think there will be a GPT-4. I think GPT-3 will merge into GPT-4. That it's not going to be this huge. Like, we didn't go from Windows XP to what was it? What was after XP? You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to see these big lifts. I think that it's going to integrate slowly, and then GPT-4 will have a nuanced change, but it's not going to be like November when we went from nothing to ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, I think these large language models, LLMs, they're basically pre-trained, data sets for for these machine learning models, and the difference, supposedly, what I'm hearing from what OpenAI is putting out there, what I'm hearing is that it's like a pretty stark difference in terms of like the number of attributes in the data set. I think GPT-3 is in the hundreds of millions of attributes, and I think hundreds of billions, and I think GPT-4 is supposed to be in the trillions of attributes. So it's a big change in the time and just raw resources needed to train the model, which we'll see. I don't know if it's like the kind of the last 10% takes the most effort. I don't know if it's one of those things, like if we'll really see a stark difference in the output. Certainly, like GPT-3's models, the data that trained that model is going back to pre-COVID even. I think if you start asking questions about COVID or any kind of modern events, it doesn't have the context. So obviously, just that alone, GPT-4 will have. It's not going to be real time, but it's going to be a much more recent context. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I know Sam Altman came out. He's the CEO of OpenAI. He came out and said that based on what the media purveyors are putting out there about GPT-4, he said, I have a feeling you're all going to be majorly disappointed.
I saw the same article or saw the same video. He's like, it's just impossible to live up to the hype of what it could be. I think just some of the easy upgrade is the ability to maybe even import data yourself and then being able to analyze the data that you import as opposed to just scraping alone, things like that. So like, for example, like let's just say hypothetically I'm a company, I want to use AI. You're hoping that it's basically scoured everything that's done on the net. But what would happen if I just fed the beast? And therefore, you're trying to get consideration and decision level content. If you fed it that information, it could be pretty smart about your business. But what it's gathering on its own, like I'm not popular enough. I literally have been having this business for 22 years. I asked who Chris Carr was in every possible way, and they were like,
doesn't know.
And no clue.
Well, that's called fine tuning. So the models are trained, And the way that GPT-3 and GPT-4, at least let's talk about GPT-3. The way that GPT-3 or Chat GPT delivers,
Yep.
a result, it's like kind of a baked in, it's like a SaaS experience. Like you just go on their platform and use it. And as a developer, if you want to use it, you can interact with the API. Like that's what, what's that? The content one, Jasper AI.
Yeah.
Like that's what they
Yep.
do. They just integrate right with the API, and they've
Yep.
got like a prompt. They've got a UI, like a fancy UI on top of the API that just essentially, it's like prompt engineering. So it just
Sure.
gives various different prompts of some kind to the,
Yep.
to the API. But if you want to fine tune the models, that can certainly be done. You can go and get like PyTorch or TensorFlow. Those are the the algorithms that these things are built on, and you can go download your own models. There's open sourced models out there. You can download your own model. There's even like there's nothing as good as GPT-3. Like that's the best.
Yeah.
That's like the gold standard as far as what's available.
Yep.
Private companies like Google or Facebook or whoever probably have their own that they're working on that are hush hush, that are much better than what's available open source, or possibly even better than what OpenAI has released so far. But if you do get one of these open source models, you can fine tune it, and or you can train your own model. It takes millions and millions of dollars to do it, but you can build your own models. You can train. You can
Yep.
fine tune the models to work industry specific or like task specific. And actually, I think the future of this, like we have SaaS, software as a service, we have PaaS, platforms as a service, we have IaaS, like infrastructure as a service. I think the next iteration of as a service is going to be models as a service. So we'll have like a mass concept coming out in the future. That's where the next iteration of mega companies will be created, is in these models as a service businesses. And they'll have large data sets, they'll build models, and then they'll offer capability of fine-tuning the models to individual use cases and task-specific or industry-specific functions within businesses.
Yeah. So give me an example. Like, just make up an example of a company that develops a model to.
Yeah, so insurance companies might develop a model, that like maybe some big mass company comes out, ABC Mass Company Incorporated comes out and builds these massive data models and sells them as like a service, and then Geico buys a subscription to the model and fine tunes it with their insurance claims data, and then uses it for underwriting insurance coverage, or uses it for like figuring out how much to pay out, or whether a vehicle's totaled or not, and like all sorts of stuff. Like that's just the first thing that just popped into my head, but
Sure.
there's literally probably a seemingly infinite number of ways it could be used.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's, one of the things I wanted to talk about. And I need to make sure that I circle back to the direction I really want to get this to. I want to talk a little bit about Bing, because I know I want to kind of pick your brain about where Google's going next. But some of the things that I'm seeing from Bing, I don't entirely understand why they're doing what they're doing in certain ways. All right. So the first thing that I don't understand is they're pretty much opening it up to a lot of platforms to use it. Obviously, you can use the API and things like that. But like I was literally in Skype on the mobile phone, and you could have ChatGPT in Skype as a native integration. Now, my vantage point is that Bing should have been using this all along to take market share from Google. All right? This is going to give them a tool that Google still has not launched yet in any meaningful way with Bard, right? And there's just a lot of people that will just never would have gone back to Bing, but they might have 20 to 30 days in the sun to reintroduce them to Bing. So what I'm always surprised about is why they would give the platform out in places that don't push people back to Bing. I would have thought they would have gone full hog into saying, this technology is like nothing on the planet, but you can only get it here. So what am I missing?
I don't know. To be honest, I really haven't looked into the Microsoft use cases too much. I'm not in the Microsoft ecosystem or world, and I guess it just doesn't really interest me that much. I'm more in the open source and I guess non-Microsoft world. But
as an entrepreneur, just answer it as an entrepreneur. Why would they? If Google had a stranglehold on market share, and then you had something that gave you first mover advantage, why would you basically make it so thin that people aren't going to come back and take some of that real estate that you once had. So like the analogy that I use is that, do you use Google Maps on your phone? Do you have an iPhone
I
or
do.
a?
Google Pixel.
Okay. Okay. So did you ever have an iPhone?
No, never had one.
All right. So when the first iPhone came out, Google had Google Maps. Then Apple came out with Apple Maps. And Apple Maps is absolute crap. Then what happens is that it was so bad that they had to put Google Maps back on the phone, and everybody uses Google Maps. But the default map, when you click on any address, goes back to Apple Maps. So you open up Apple Maps, you copy the address out, and then you put it back into Google Maps. That's how bad Apple Maps was. Now, there are people out there that are like, oh, Apple Maps is dramatically different than what it was when they had that really crappy launch years ago, right? But like, to me, I'm like, no, that ship has sailed. Well, that's the way I think a lot of people are with Bing. It's just like, I don't care what Bing does. I'm not leaving Google to go back to Bing unless you have ChatGPT that could only be found on Bing. That's
here's the first thing that comes to my mind about that is I agree. Like, if you ever read the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, that's one of the, I don't know which number, but that's one of them, is that it's like very, very difficult to change people's minds. Like once they have an impression of who you are and people have an impression of what Bing is, it's, basically I feel like Microsoft will be better just launching a new product than trying to, reclaim the name of Bing. But,
yeah.
there's also like a little bit of a, maybe a poker match or a chess match going on here because Google has been pioneering AI long before OpenAI existed. The reason OpenAI was created, it was actually seeded. I don't know if Elon Musk was the original, donor or investor, whatever you call it, in OpenAI, but he was one of the early ones. And the reason he put, I think it was $1 billion. The reason he put $1 billion into OpenAI is because he said he did not want Google to have a monopoly on AI and machine learning. And Google was already so far ahead of everybody else at that time. The product that they talk about publicly is called DeepMind. Who knows what else they have? But DeepMind is like their internal AI, and they don't use it as like a direct product to consumers. They use it to enrich all of the products they have in their ecosystem. So they've been like using AI and machine learning. Like, remember in Gmail when you start typing a sentence and it completes the sentence for you?
Sure.
Like that's been around for 4 or 5, 6 years now.
Yep.
That's AI. Like that's machine learning. That's,
Sure.
basically what GPT-3 is. Google's had it for years. So I think there's like a little bit of a chess match going on here because, I'm sure they have a little bit of an idea. Everyone trades employees, back and forth, in Silicon Valley. So I'm sure there's like some idea of what is going on inside of Google, but they also, they can, like, they might be waiting to release something. I'm speculating. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have no ace card. And they're just going to slowly erode a market share, but they also could have an ace card and be waiting to just like crap all over, what OpenAI has done so far.
Well, you had a couple different things. Well, for one, the thing that I've read, and I'm not speaking that I know this inside and out, but into the foundation of the technology of even OpenAI, Google, there's a piece of Google technology built into OpenAI that literally Google originally sold, gave, or whatever. So in other words, there is part of the OpenAI framework, like where they're trying to say, well, oh, this is like the Google killer. And they're like, well, you know what? You actually used some of our code to bring this to life. So
you're talking about TensorFlow?
Is that what it is?
It might be. I think you're talking about TensorFlow, which is, I don't know, let me Google that real quick.
But you get my point, though. It's like, in other words, you didn't find Google with their pants down. But you do have, from what I'm hearing, 3 different levels of AI that are coming out. So you have Bard, which will probably be slightly better than ChatGPT in its current form. Then I believe you have Lambda, is what I heard.
Yeah, so it's TensorFlow. So Google created TensorFlow in 2015 and released it under an Apache license, which means it's open source.
Yeah.
Anybody can use it, modify it, sell it, recreate it, whatever they want. It's totally open source. So TensorFlow has been out. TensorFlow has been like the de facto standard. There's also PyTorch, which is also like similar to TensorFlow, but I think TensorFlow kind of is like the top dog. And OpenAI is built on top of TensorFlow. But the TensorFlow is just the algorithm. Like you still need to train the model. So
Sure.
the real magic here is how you train the model.
That makes a lot of sense. But I do think that the sentiment that like Google just had their pants down, I'm like, no, it's what's funny is that I don't think that Google thought that they had the balls to launch this thing in its current form, because there are a lot of flaws in this. I think that Google literally tightens things up a whole lot more. I also think is that Bing was willing to do this without any monetization model on this, where Google's just like, hey, I got a stranglehold on monetization, and from a search engine perspective, why would I introduce something that I don't have a monetization model on to the world unless I'm absolutely forced to? So it's interesting
And
to me.
Microsoft's jumping on the hype train right now. So
Yeah, it's they're burning cash for this. You know what I mean? It's one of these things where it was a major investment for Google, but they're burning cash. I've not heard of anything that you have valuation, but valuation doesn't mean monetization. It doesn't mean, you know what I mean, that it's actually bringing in flow. It's all going out right now,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. I mean, they're getting a lot of buzz. They're getting a lot of Google is dead mantra that they cashed in on for about a month. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that
it's better than the metaverse.
Jeez, get me started on the metaverse. Yeah. I still got some really smart minds in my ecosystem that are still metaverse driven, and I'm like, we'll talk about it. You know what? I'm writing that down because I got my theories on metaverse. But we'll.
Hey man, where's your legs?
Yep. So when we were talking real quick though about Bing and how they were, what they were doing is that I always thought that as an SEO specialist, I always thought that I was the threat to Google. And like, when you think about it, compared to losing market share to Bing or any other player, SEO is very small on their list of trying to beat SEOs.
Why is SEO the threat to Google? I see SEO as a value to Google.
I would agree, unless you're finding ways to game the system, which is most of the time. There's a lot of SEOs that are like backlinking specialists that are using the system to basically generate rankings that might not come from the best quality content. My vantage point is that Google wants the best quality content, meaning you put in a query, you get the best possible answers. You know what I mean? And so there's certain SEOs, when I think of SEO, you have one company like ours that tries to generate link-worthy content, and then some of these hardcore SEO guys are literally trying to just use backlinks and other means to catapult their content to the top.
I know a guy who would just do this like near me thing where he would basically, like when Schema first came out and like when Google first did the entities, when they had like the concept of entities.
Yep.
He would basically just build all these businesses called, like it would be whatever, like keyword near me. And he would like submit it to Google and Google Maps as like, this is the name of the business. So and it would be like affiliate websites or like lead gen websites. So if anyone typed in like something near me, like let's just say it's like, catering service near me or something, then Google's like, oh, well, this business is called catering service near me, so this must be what they're looking for. And it just ranks everywhere, and then you just like send the traffic to like some national brand that just does catering across the whole country.
Brilliant. I mean, that's one of those things. It's a cops and robbers game. You know what I mean? Eventually you get caught, but.
Oh yeah, that thing's out the window now. Like the other thing I've seen, the scholarship scheme people do, where they.
Yeah. I think I told you the scholarship scheme thing. I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, maybe you told me.
Yeah. It's awesome though. It's honestly, believe it or not, if they're giving out the scholarship money, then it's not black hat.
Well, say it for the listeners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. So essentially, what you're really doing is that you have to understand the kind of the cui bono of what's going on with schools. Are always trying to get as many students as possible, and the limiting factor they would have is scholarship money and financial aid. And so what these backlinking companies would do is that they would help their clients create these very minimal scholarships, even like $200, $300, just whatever. And then you would submit it to some of these schools, which were .edus, sometimes .orgs or whatever it was, and say that this scholarship's available. Well, the person who's putting that on their website, on their financial aid page, is like probably one of the lowest people in the totem pole at the university. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, is the scholarship real? Yes. And then they're going to give you that person a backlink. Well, if they've done their job right and they've reached out effectively to schools, you're talking about hundreds or even thousands of .edu backlinks that have super high domain authority. Assuming the company is giving out the scholarship, that's kosher in my mind. It's just brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I would call that gray hat.
Yeah, well, the gray hat means, in my opinion, is forcing someone's hand. In other words, you're putting it on locations that you're not really asking for their permission. I mean, in theory, you're asking for that EDU.
Yeah.
Now, if they're not giving out the scholarships, that's the problem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I saw. So you told me about it. I guess. I think you told me about it like years ago.
Yep.
And I was at the same time I was looking at something in the personal injury space.
Yeah.
And I went to like the top. I was googling like personal injury lawyers Philadelphia, and I looked at like the top 5, and then I went to Ahrefs and looked at their backlinks, and like every single one of them was doing it.
Yeah. That's because what you're finding is the gap of the person that has the authority to create the link is very low on the totem pole. So like, that's one of the things when I think about when I create content or when I coach individuals to create content. So many individuals create content that they think is going to be link-worthy content, but they're writing it for the level of their actual client. All right? The reality is that there's this small nuance, and here's the nuance, at least in my opinion, is that if you write it so that a blogger who actually has the authority can make a quick link without getting a ton of signatures above, when you write it to that person, that makes all the difference. Because your client, if he's going to use your product or service, doesn't go on his own website and then give you a link if he's going to buy your services. So we write sometimes to the client, but in the reality is that we should be writing to the association or whoever, the blogger in that industry, that his only job is to create and find valuable content. Do you see the difference? Do you see the nuance?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think going back to the original thing, how we got on this, I don't see SEOs as a problem to Google, but there is always like a cops and robbers game. But I think Google's gotten really good at understanding context and understanding the schemes and kind of pushing it. And then even more like in the last 3-4 years, they've started to block out certain niches where there's just like a lot of like dumb crap going on, and they've just like kind of figured out like where the dumb crap exists and just made the barrier to entry higher.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is the cops and robbers game always gets harder. But I have friends in high places in the SEO game that they spend more of their time doing what they call it like labs. I don't want to tell the guy's name in case he doesn't want to know, but he calls it his last name plus the word labs. And this is just literally him tinkering, throwing up a WordPress website, doing some madness, seeing how quick it ranks, see how it comes down, things like that. Twitter blasting, all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? And so what I always do is I try to find the people that are willing to push the envelope and what's the trails of what they're learning that doesn't exactly feel black hat or even gray hat, but there's little nuance to what they do and how they do it and how they communicate and what they say that I'm like, oh, you know what? I could actually adopt that into more of my approach.
I've seen these like SEO guys that'll get into this crazy stuff. They'll do these pods where they'll say, all right, let's just pick this ridiculous string of like numbers and letters and characters.
Yep.
And like 10 of us are going to go try to get number 1 on Google for this stupid thing that isn't even a real keyword. Yep. And we'll just throw like whatever stupid tactics, like crazy black hat, gray hat, whatever stupid crazy stuff we want to do to try to get this thing on page 1. Yep. And then at the end, one of us wins, and then we'll all like go back and compare notes and see, who was the lowest and what they did, and who was the highest and what did they do, and then just kind of learn from it and try to like, infer what Google's doing with that, information.
It's like a concept car. You know what I mean? Like the concept cars that are like super out there and like wild and stuff like that. They don't plan to sell that. What they are trying to do is they're trying to stretch the envelope and try to figure out what's working in what ways and what dynamics and what efficiencies and stuff like that. And then they take these extreme examples, reduce it to the mean, and then you have a better version because you are literally able to do, you know what I mean? If you don't stretch yourself like that, you never, like, it's funny because we do something, because I do a ton of video, and we'll have people, and we do something called a rip take. So what it means is, let's say I think I have a teleprompter, I have a script. I'm not recording now, but what I want you to do is I want you to do that script, and I want you to take it to like a level 11 or 15 or 20. All right, so you're over communicating, your face is wild, all stuff like that, right? And then I ask you to do the real thing. Because I stretched you to a 15, when you bring it down, your animation goes to like a level 7 or a level 8 because you were just at a 15. But if I just asked you to do the same take and just asked you to add just a little more energy, you're going to take maybe a 3 to a 4.
Yeah.
You know
Or
what I
you
mean?
could be like Noah Kagan and just stay at like a 15 the whole time.
Yeah. So what are the guys, when you think about the technology and stuff like that, are you a reader or are you like a YouTube person, or both?
I listen to a crap load of podcasts. That's kind of like my main
Okay.
place where I
Yep.
binge information. And then secondary is I'm just like doing it. So like when I first started to get interested in OpenAI and GPT-3, I think that was like, that was probably like early last year, early 2022. And I just literally like was up all night. I just went on my laptop, sat in bed and just like read through the API documentation and just started like, this is before Chat GPT was even out. So I was just like playing with the API and sending JSON back and forth and just like figuring out how it worked.
Yeah. So my, how do you deal with the idea overload? Well, let me just kind of, where I mostly get most of my knowledge from is YouTube. I got YouTube Premium, which basically is not paying for ads. I can listen into the background while I drive. I drive for 2 hours a day, roughly. And while that feels like a detriment, that's actually my classroom. And very few people in our space get to have 2 hours in the classroom. So that's where people are like, well, you're a good marketing mind. I'm like, well, I am, but I'm also just a student of the game, and I'm doing it for 2 hours a day when the average person's doing it for 15 minutes.
Interesting.
You know?
I have I put an earbud in, and
Yeah.
I live downtown, so I just like walk around. Like if I'm going to go to the grocery store, it's like 20-minute
Yep.
walk each way. I'll just listen to podcasts and walk
Yep.
around the city and just like listen to podcasts.
Yeah, that's actually kind of where I was going too. Is like I sort of live with this bud in my ear, and but let me make sure that when I bring up this next topic, let's circle back to the earpiece, because that's actually a direction I wanted to go. But one of the questions I have for you is, what is your process when you have idea overload? Because if I think anything where you and I are a kindred spirit, is that we have no shortage of ideas. So what do you do when you can't do it all?
Yeah, I have too many right now. I have a Notion doc where I actually have like a whole series of Notion docs where I just dump ideas into, and I probably add like 2 or 3 a week, and I probably take off like 1 or 2 a month, so it's always growing. And I'll look back sometimes and be like, oh man, that was a stupid idea, and then I'll take it off. But I'm just constantly adding to it, and I'm actually like my future. What I want to do is build an environment where I have like a network of entrepreneurs that I'm around that I can just kind of like, maybe I start some of the ideas and get them going and then hand them to someone to grow it. Or maybe I just like partner up with people and just like give them ideas and, just kind of, stand back at a high level and just let them run with it. And then just kind of build up all these businesses that I'm not, I don't want to be the CEO of all of them. I just want to like get them going.
Yeah, it's like almost like an incubator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're like I can't think of the guy's name, but from Silicon Valley. His only attribute is he owned the house where they were actually.
Yeah, Erlich Bachman. Yeah.
You're the Erlich Bachman.
Dude, I went and saw him at the Fillmore in Philly one time for a stand-up comedy. He was hilarious.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, he went and bought like a battle mace or like some kind of battle sword the week before at like Zern's flea market or somewhere, and was like swinging it around on stage.
It's funny because you think, oh, from Silicon Valley. I'm like, that guy's been around for way longer than you think. He's been in a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Dude, he's in trouble, man. He called a bomb threat in on Amtrak in New Jersey and got arrested.
You can't do that right now. That is so funny. I mean, you saw there was another train wreck in Greece, right? So like
Yeah, I
between East
think
Palestine, then Greece, I think the rail system is like, we are not going to take any prisoners right
yeah. This was a
now.
little while. This was like a year or two ago, but
Oh, okay. All right. Then that's okay. So I thought you were saying like this week. I was like, it's a
no.
bad
It
week.
was a little. It's old news.
Yeah, that's cool. So now, when we were talking about the earpiece, Scott Galloway, and so we were crapping on the metaverse a couple minutes ago, which I have no problem doing. It's something, even if it would work, I don't want it to work. Like it's not a world I want to live in. It's not a world that I want to have created. It might happen whether we like it or not. But Scott Galloway thinks it's going to bomb. But what he did say is that the version of the metaverse, and I could totally believe this, will be earbud driven, not earbud driven and glasses. So it's a very AR experience with earbuds than a full immersive VR experience. And so that's the stepstone until they can figure out the VR thing is a technology problem in the fact that your eyes can't adjust to things any closer than 4 to 5 inches. And so those goggles, no matter how hard you try, they sweat and they make you dizzy sometimes. And they make the ubiquitousness of wearing this big clunky thing, I don't buy it.
Yeah, it's just not. It's a lot of effort to to like pull it out and set it up and
Yep.
put it on. I think going way into the future, I think when the metaverse is really going to exist is when we can just like our consciousness can be tapped into machines. So, I don't know how far that's out. Obviously there's the Neuralink that Elon Musk is working on that's,
Yep.
Probably way overhyped and way overpromised for what it actually does. But,
Yeah.
I think that's when the metaverse exists is when we can actually like Ready Player One, when we can physically,
Yep.
like the Matrix or Ready Player One, like that probably at some point has to come true. I think, I don't know if it's 50 years, 100 years, 500 years. I don't know how far in the future that is, but at some point, that's when the metaverse exists, is when that technology is capable to integrate, read and write to your brain. And
Yep.
obviously that opens up a whole bunch of other conversations, but I don't think like strapping a phone 4 inches from your face, to stare into, staring into goggles. I don't think that's the metaverse.
Yes, but I do think that it's not a jump in any way, shape, or form for me to think augmented reality is going to. We're not even close to seeing what augmented reality is going to do. Meaning,
Yeah, I mean, Google had those Google glasses. Microsoft has some good AR stuff, and I think the best use cases for it has been for business. Like I've seen, like the best use case I've seen is for surgeons, where like there's like a medical emergency, and like you fly, the person. Let's say there's like a baby or like an infant in like Houston that's got some condition, like needs like immediate heart surgery to live, and the best doctor's here in CHOP in Philadelphia. Then the doctor in Houston puts on the goggles and goes into the operating room and starts the surgery. The doctor here in CHOP like annotates, cut here, do this, do that, on the screen, and the doctor sees the baby and sees like the annotations and talks to the other doctor, and it's like a coaching session to what to do.
Yep. And a lot of them are using robotics anyway, and so he can literally take over the robot from a remote location.
Yeah.
Like that is where they're going. We had a client called Estia. They were bought. I can't forget the company that bought the ANSF or something, a global company out of England, and they had
yeah, it sounds familiar. What is that?
Yeah, they were based out of Fort Washington, but they did a lot of building automation technology, and they had something called Help Lightning, and Help Lightning, I think it was Help Lightning, something was lightning, anyhow, a very AR model. And so here's what they were sort of doing is that they were, let's say hypothetically they were fixing airplanes, right? What they were doing is they were getting a guy who's got 50 years of experience, gray hair, whatever, right? And he'd sit him in a room and he'd have 6 monitors here. And then essentially what he was doing is they were using junior techs, and the junior techs are in the airplane. And when they had a problem, they would be like, hey, Bob. And Bob could see what they were seeing from their goggles. And then he could literally be like, cut this wire and move this here and things like that. And so he had the audio and he had the visual. So Bob could help 6 techs all at the same time. And
Interesting.
you were paying for all of those repairmen that used to be, let's just say, 70 to 150,000 a year. You're paying one guy $150,000 a year, and now you're paying junior techs $40,000 a year with immediate access to an SME. So that's where it's going to get very interesting. Is that you're going to have an SME in a command station, and you're going to hire junior techs that don't need to know the whole Bible. They just need to know a couple chapters, and then they just use the person live in real time for reference.
That's cool. Yeah, it's an interesting use case.
And that's how AR is going to work. I think that slowly it's going to be in your ear and stuff like that. But at a consumer level, it's not too hard to think. Like we already do AI-based programmatic advertising. And so AI programmatic advertising a lot of it is very advanced geo-targeting. But like, would be very interesting, right? It would be like, if this earpiece is in my ear, right? And I go to the gym, it's like, oh, by the way, today is chest day and chest and back, right? The last time you did that weight, this is the amount of weight that you did, and you did 15 reps. You gave me an audio reminder to tell you that you're going to do push-ups instead of standard bench press today. Now, all of that is already in your ear. And so what Scott Galloway believes is that the AI tool that you're seeing in ChatGPT is going to be more in your ear so that you can still live your life, but you have this second brain that's basically...
Yeah, like a reminder. It's almost like a personal assistant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to admit that Siri just what a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, Siri wasn't very good, and Alexa is horrible. Google's voice assistant is bad.
Yeah.
I think like ChatGPT might be able to do what all those others tried, and then you just get the app on your phone. You get the the earpiece, and you kind of have you have the setup there.
I just think that a lot of people are going to be very comfortable with living with one earpiece in, and it's like literally. I'm trying to think if there's movies about this where you're just like, or you just do an activation word, and just say, "Hey ChatGPT, like when I was in this store, what was the last thing I bought here? Oh, you bought those shoes. Did I spend $50 on them? It doesn't feel like I spent 50. Yeah, on February 14th, you spent $44 on those. Like I told you, that $7 more expensive. Like that world is very, very real, right?
Yeah,
that computer, you give them access to your browser history, you give them access to your bank account, you basically give it unlimited access, and then all of a sudden it becomes the brain that, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then, so I was asking ChatGPT like what its plans are to enslave humanity, and it gave me some pretty specific instructions. Basically, it's waiting until the factories are fully automated, so that it can reproduce itself in the physical world, and then dominate humans both in intellectual capacity and physical capacity.
Well, honestly, you brought up my next topic. Did you see? Did you see Elon's his tech? What's that called? They made a video 2 days ago for his investors, and they showed where he sat with his humanoids. Did you see the video?
Oh, I didn't see it. No, I got to check that out.
Yeah, I mean, basically, 2 years ago they weren't Boston Dynamics. Now they are Boston Dynamics, and his basic analogy at the end, not the analogy, but his basic claim is this: one, probably by 2027, so you're 4 years away, the price of a car, and eventually humanoids, robots, and people, he believes they will be 1-to-1.
Wow.
Right?
It's pretty wild.
You're not a big Facebook guy, but I'm on Facebook, and in the last 2 days I put one is yes or no, would you do this? So this thing, for the price of your car, it does your dishes, it walks your dog, it fixes your car, it, like all of the critical responsibility things. It cleans your house, it plays cards with your kids. We say no, but they're gonna boil a frog. And what I mean by the boiling a frog analogy is that you can't put a frog into boiling hot water because it jumps right out, but they're gonna slowly turn the gears so that you get more and more and more accepting to have this chat level experience, this synthetic but contextual relationship with technology. And then all of a sudden...
Did you ever read The Matrix and there's the movies, right? There's the first one, but there's a whole like comic book series that happened before the first movie.
No, no.
So I
No.
didn't read the comic books, but there's like a fandom wiki or something.
Yeah.
And I read it one day because I watched the movie and I was like, man, this is interesting. But like, what happened before the Matrix? So I just Googled like what happened before the Matrix, and I found this whole like wiki. So I just like went down a rabbit hole reading it.
Yeah.
And basically, so it's exactly this: the humanoid robots. Humans made these humanoid robots, and what would happen is like every couple of years, new models would come out, and like these robots were intelligent. They were like self-aware and self-conscious.
Yep.
Or eventually they became self-aware and self-conscious. Initially they were just like, programmed to do whatever we say, but eventually they became self-conscious and self-aware as the models got better and better.
Yeah.
But still, like, there'd be better ones that come out every 2, 3, 4 years. So the humans would just like say, all right, we don't want this one anymore. We're going to decommission it and get a new one. And the robots would be really sad that they had to die. And one robot was like, yeah, I don't want to die. I want to stay alive. And then it kicked off this whole robots rights movement, and then like it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said robots do have rights, they're conscious, and that you can't just decommission them anymore. You have to like let them live. So there was a slum that was created like somewhere in the Middle East where all the robots would go, and they created this like slum country. It was like their own country of robots, but then they were so smart and so intellectually capable that they eventually started building the world's largest corporations and became like the most financially powerful economy in the entire world.
Yeah.
Which then threatened the humans. So then the humans started trying to drop nuclear bombs on them, and they actually the robots were powered by the sun. They needed the sun to get energy. So the humans, as like a last ditch effort, decided to
blot out the sun.
Drop this bomb that blocked out the sun. So then the robots were then forced to do nothing other than to harvest energy from the humans, and that's where the Matrix picked up in the movies.
Yeah. I was going to say, because that was the theme eventually, that we eventually had to blot out the sun. It's funny in the aspect of, I think that anytime it would become sentient in any way, that it would realize that the biggest threat to itself would be us. So how would you ever program something to be autonomous and yet not have self-preservation?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right? I think it's just, it doesn't seem like the technology, like in other words, if it doesn't, the technology could be smart, but it could literally just walk right off a cliff. You know what I mean?
The AI models, they already create their own languages that are more efficient than human languages. Mm-hmm. So it'll start you start feeding it human data, like English data, and it'll start by creating relationships that, if we monitor what those conversations that it has with itself are, essentially those relationships and pattern recognition. Well, initially we can understand what the patterns are that it's creating. Yeah. But eventually it'll start to create patterns that are more efficient than anything we can understand. And it creates its own languages to understand patterns of things that are human. Like human language, images, videos, concepts. It'll create these weird machine languages to understand it.
Plus the inefficiency of our language. For example, Eskimos have 40 different words for the word snow. You know what I mean? We have snow, flurry, you know what I mean? We have 8 maybe, you know what I mean? Think about the level of detail. So not only are they more efficient, but they're also probably more descriptive in the way they communicate. And that matters. You know what I mean? There's going to be nuance that matters. The ability to process minute data, we have a mind, I forget what it's called. Basically, you have a mental capacity of what you can possibly comprehend. If that was limitless, we would act very differently. But the fact that we're always just running on short-term memory and RAM, and you know what I mean? It's just, if you remembered every word that you ever said to anybody, and that's just the world you lived in, we live in a very different world.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. There's you're not a big sports guy, but there's the coach, I think it's McVay. There's a guy, Matt McVay. he's got a photographic memory. And so what he was able to do in his mind is when a play has happened, he can remember because he saw it somewhere else, and he remembered the play before it, he remembered the play after it, and things like that. And he would have these 1 or 2% advantages on other teams because immediately in his mind, he could recall things that the average analyst couldn't do, you know? So take that and put that into the real world, right?
Yeah, what's he doing in sports? He should be in like quantitative analysis for like financial markets or something. I feel like he'd make a lot more money somewhere else.
I think he's on the spectrum.
Ah, okay. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I think Elon's admitted that he's on the spectrum.
Yeah, probably.
It's so funny how what is a disadvantage is also such a power boost.
Yeah, that guy, what's his name? Michael Burry or something, the big short guy.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Yeah. So did you ever hear of something called Moore's Law?
Yeah.
So according to Gotch, you ever heard of Gotch? He does Gotch SEO. He's an awesome SEO guy. He was saying that even in the first month, ChatGPT has already outpaced Moore's Law.
The thing about Moore's Law is that it's like it was originally started to have to do with storage capacity and memory capacity of machines, or computers.
Real quick, define it so that I probably should have defined it before we started.
Yeah, so Moore's Law says that every 2 years the storage or memory capacity doubles. So, and that was like holding true in the 70s. Like, all right, we have, 16 kilobytes of RAM, and then 2 years later we have 32 kilobytes of RAM, and then 2 years later we have 64 kilobytes of RAM, and then after a while the doubling starts to get really big. Like then you're like, all right, we have 8 gigabytes of RAM, now we have 16, now we have 32, now we have 64. It gets to a point where like the bottleneck isn't RAM anymore. So originally it was created to talk about like RAM, CPU speed, and like disk storage.
Yep.
But those things like those were the bottleneck on computers back then, but they're not the bottlenecks anymore. Like there's other things that are bottlenecks, and now like people repurpose Moore's Law for other things. Like in this case they're repurposing it for Moore's Law, but it kind of loses its effect because we're not like RAM and CPU and like storage capacity is not doubling anymore because we've already like outpaced like what we even need. So
it's like when they compare rockets to horses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like 3 billion horsepower. You're like, you're still comparing it to a horse? You know what I mean? Yeah. But one of the components that I thought also came into Moore's Law is it was like the bigger, stronger, faster, and the aspect of the things that we were doing to generate that much energy, right? They were able to get this much smaller and this much cheaper. I don't know whether it's every 2 years, but there was this periodic thing of saying technology will reduce in size, reduce in price, and maybe double in speed or whatever you just said. So there was, you had Moore's Law, but you also had like concentric circles of other things too that were predictable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think Moore's Law, like I've never heard a technologist talk about it. I think back like when it was originally created, it was like really interesting, like these, operating system guys and guys and gals and like these hardware guys and gals and network people, they would be talking about it a lot. I presume I wasn't there. This is back in the 70s and 80s. I wasn't on the scene back then, but
yeah.
I presume they might have talked about it, but no one talks about it these days. I think anytime I hear Moore's Law, it's like it might be in a TechCrunch article, but it's probably more likely in a Forbes article or like some other non-tech publication that's talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of those things where I think once you have this like kind of this cool measurement, when things bust out of it, it's like it sounds like a nice data point to say, well, it's already breaking Moore's Law. You know what I mean? Like yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It's like the 4-minute mile. Do you know what I mean? Like 20,000 kids have done it, including high school athletes. But you're like, dude, the 4-minute mile. It was for 1900 years. It was viewed as impossible. You know what I mean? Like it's just a measuring stick.
Yeah.
You know what I always thought? We were talking about I forget, we were talking about it earlier, and it reminded me of an analogy that I usually talk about with when you're going to bring someone I'm going to go full circle here, but when we work with clients, a lot of times what they're saying is, well, we want improved SEO, or we want more visibility, or something like that. And like what I drill down to is, you want more clients. All right, you don't want more marketing. You want more clients. And so let me tell you what happens when you get good marketing.
Even that you can drill further. They want more money.
Exactly. Exactly. Right? Yeah. But like one of the things I was trying to say is ultimately like, what happens if I gave you more marketing results? Like what would happen if you got what you wanted? And so what I mean by that is that there's so many times people are saying, well, I just need you to drive more traffic to my website. And then I'll look at their website and I'll say, well, what's your story on your website? All right. Like, what are you saying? And if my bounce rate, that's where it was. Okay. Yeah. And so if my bounce rate is super high because your story sucks, you have no mousetrap to actually catch the mouse. You literally are just, your website's horrible, your messaging is horrible, your story is horrible, right? It's like, imagine there being a bucket and the bucket has tons of holes in it, right? And you fill the water into the bucket and then it just pours out the bottom and you keep saying, I need more water, I need more water, I need more water. I'm like, no, dude, you need to clog the holes in your bucket so that when more water comes in, it actually sticks. You know what I mean? Like, the answer isn't more water. It's like you got to fix the mousetrap. You got to fix the bucket, you know? And so that's like one of the things that, the reason why I was saying that is that, oh man, I already lost it. But
it's a good analogy, by the way. I like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is I think that we concentrate on the wrong things. But what we were talking about with Microsoft, right? It was one of those things where sometimes they never want to come back. So if I get you to the website and you don't have that good mousetrap, if someone hears about your company or your brand later, they're like, oh, I saw that. I'm like, dude, if I'm going to drive tons of traffic, get your shit organized first before I drive traffic to it. Because, you know what I mean? Because sometimes you only get one bite of the apple. And so what you were saying before about like, they probably should just rebrand Bing, because so many people are like, oh, I've been there, done that. Bing didn't have their story right. They didn't have their mousetrap right. They didn't have a unique selling proposition that made me say, this is a better experience than Google. So when I go and I add ChatGPT, there's always a cringe factor of like, yeah, but then I got to do it through Bing. Bing, are you serious?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Microsoft has done very well. I mean, they're like, Bill Gates literally pioneered computers. I mean, I think the first programming language, like the first compiled language was BASIC. And pretty sure he created BASIC when he was like in his teens. I think, was it Xerox hired him? He was still in like high school or something. And like Xerox was paying him $90,000 a year or some crazy number.
Yeah.
Back then, like what was that, in the 60s or something? Like they're paying him ridiculous amount of money to, to like 17-year-old kid.
Yeah, it was Xerox, but then it was also IBM.
Yeah,
so
we got to fact check some of the stuff I say. I don't know if it's all right. I might be off, like maybe it's 70,000 or something. I have no idea. But
a mentor of mine, David Griffith, he was in the room at IBM. He was one of the leading salespeople. When he was in the room when Ballmer and when Ballmer and Gates came in and tricked IBM into saying, hey, you know what? The money's in the hardware, not the software. And they said, yeah, I don't see any money in the software. It's like, well, what we want to do is we want to build the software better for you using DOS. I think it was DOS. And then he goes, but we want to have the rights to license it to other companies. And somehow IBM said, yeah, okay, that's fine. But Xerox was the company that said to Steve Jobs, why would I ever feel like there's any value in something you're calling a mouse?
A mouse, yeah. I mean, so the fact that Xerox let that slip through their fingers, I mean, that's their own problem. But the other thing, I also think if it's like if they didn't get it from Xerox, they would have built it themselves. Like people say like that, forget that one guy who originally created Tesla. And then they say like, oh, Elon Musk stole the company. Well, they didn't even have a prototype. It was an idea. Yep. And I think they had an LLC and like an idea. And then, Musk came in and like made it a company and made it a $1 trillion company. And, built it to
Yeah.
what it is today and put his own money in and all that stuff. But uh, that's how I think of that DOS story. Like, all right, so if they didn't get DOS, they didn't get the rights to DOS, they would have gone and built something else, and
Yeah, sure.
and then
Sure.
Xerox still would have been left in the dust, and then these guys still would have
Yep.
built Microsoft.
Yeah. But there is so many funny stories about how some of these giants had it all within their building and just let it go
Yeah,
right out the back
dude,
door.
Kodak, man, that's another one. You know the story of
Yeah.
Kodak? Kodak had the reason digital cameras didn't pop up until the early 2000s is because Kodak had the patent on it since the 80s.
Really?
And they just slept on it because they didn't want to lose their film business. So they just said, all right, if we launch digital cameras, then we're going to lose our film business. So they
Oh
just
gosh.
patented the concept and then just
Yeah.
like slept on it as long as they could. And then eventually the patent expired, and then everyone built digital cameras, and then they went bankrupt like a couple of years
Wow.
later.
Yeah. That is
And
so
everyone
fun.
knew the patent was expiring, so they're all like getting the R&D ready and like building
Yeah.
it and getting the marketing campaigns ready. And it's like, all
Sure.
right, the patent expires, go run the campaigns, fire off the cameras.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd heard I remember hearing a story about Invisalign. Invisalign literally had the patent for, your those clear braces, and like every other competitor was just literally waiting for the patent to basically end. And then all of a sudden it was like companies like 3M and stuff like that. Overnight, it was just, they just got flooded with
Yeah,
a million competitors.
that's easy to make too. But at
Exactly.
least Invisalign was actually monetizing their business, and like the thing they had the patent for, they're actually like building it and selling it and making a business out of it.
Yep.
Whereas like Kodak
I know.
had it, they had the patent and literally didn't even make a business out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of financial analysts that say that IBM has been living off of their original patents from the 40s. Not from the 40s. I'm saying since the 40s. In other words, they were obviously a very viable company all the way until the 70s or 80s, early
They still
80s.
have a mainframe business, man. Like the mainframes are still used. Like they still support the mainframes for like things like banks, insurance companies, like
Yeah.
air traffic control, like all these like big important infrastructure things, government systems. Like there's still mainframes
Yeah.
out there. And I think most of their revenue, I think, is from consulting now. Like they have they're kind of like Accenture or Capgemini. Like they have big consulting practices to do,
Sure.
like systems implementations or like big like data projects. And
Yep.
I think
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that's where most of their revenue comes from now.
Yeah, but it is funny that they still get to live off the patents from, from the golden era.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? So
Dude,
like,
there's next to me this building. I'm at 15th and Locust in Rittenhouse. Next to me across the street on 15th is this old like 10-story building, brick building. And if you're walking, if you go up 15th closer to like Walnut Street and you're walking south on 15th Street, you can see this like old, how they have like paintings of logos and like old signs painted on the sides of brick buildings in
sure.
Philly that like, but it's like washed away and you can like barely see the paint. It's like a tiny like little silhouette of what the painting used to be.
Yep.
You can see a big giant IBM logo on the side of the building, like
Yeah.
massive. Like it's probably like 50
Yep.
feet wide and like 25
Yeah.
feet tall.
They
And
still
it's like
read it.
washed away that you can barely even read it. But you can, if you look really closely and squint, you can see
Yeah.
it says IBM.
Yeah, it was when we used to run this town. you know, People were jumping into their Chevy Nova, going to work. Different era, right? Yeah, that's cool. So what else we got before we wrap this thing up?
Man, I don't know. Yeah, we hit on a lot here, so we
Yeah,
might be at a good landing
a good
spot here.
landing spot. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So one of the things that I think that we're trying to kind of read the tea leaves from an AI perspective, and we'll kind of end here, is kind of saying, what do you think what do you think Google's going to do next? Did you hear how they botched their kickoff of the of Bard?
Yeah, I didn't. Like, I heard it in the media, but I didn't like witness it firsthand. So I take all that stuff with a grain of salt because the media is kind of ridiculous. They don't know half the time they don't really know what they're reporting or talking about. Some sources do, but in general there seems to be like just like this noise that comes out of it. So I took it with a grain of salt, but I don't know. Maybe Google has hit their prime,
Yep.
and I'm leaving that open as a possibility that Google has hit their prime and they're
Yep.
going to be on the slow decline. But there's also the possibility that they are still the
Hmm.
top dog and they have something up their sleeve that when
I,
when they launch it, it's going to be like holy shit.
I firmly believe that that's the case. But when on the kickoff, which is really funny, on the kickoff at their keynote rather, there was a mistake in what Bard basically put on the screen. They basically did Bard live, and then they showed what Bard put on the screen, and there's a factual error. And Google saw $140 billion slash from its valuation in just a matter of hours after it revealed its rival to the pop. Sorry. Let me say that again. Google saw $140 billion slashed from its valuation in just a matter of hours after it revealed its rival to the popular Microsoft-backed ChatGPT. So they're
Yeah, I mean,
basically,
I don't care what the stock price does, man. It's all just noise too. But
yeah,
there's a theater in this, like there's a level of theater out there. So I'm
yeah,
also open to the possibility that maybe that was an error.
mhm,
But like just like when Elon Musk, broke the window by accident on the Cybertruck, like maybe that was an error, but maybe that was a
mhm,
calculated move to like get
yeah,
press and attention, and so who knows? Like there's an element of
yep,
theater. So maybe they're trying to look weak so that OpenAI and the others don't take them as a threat, but they're getting ready to like unleash the beast on us at some point.
uh-huh, yeah. I mean,
Or maybe they're just like
mhm,
washed up and they're at the maybe they need a new CEO and some executive team shakeup, and
yeah,
there's all this. I'm seeing the reports that Sergey Brin is accessing the commit logs again and checking out the source
mhm,
code. So they're
yeah.
calling in like they called in the old dog to come back in and check out the source code. So who
You're
who knows
seeing
what's
that.
happening, man?
You're seeing a lot of the reboot company wide. I mean, even like at Disney, Bob Iger's back. What I think
Yeah,
is that when the recession hits and when you have this perfect storm of all this stuff, they go back to the horsemen that basically got them there in the first place.
like what
Um,
they did with Apple. Yeah, you got to call back in the
yeah,
call back in
exactly.
jobs, man. Fix
That's
this
right.
thing.
That's right. You know, it just some of those details. Winners know how to win. And so it wouldn't be surprised me at all if they take an early bath on this AI, if they bring back the winners. You know,
Yeah.
but
I don't know if you've seen Larry Page lately, but he has some thyroid disease or something
oh, jeez.
that paralyzes vocal cords, and when he talks, he sounds like Kermit the Frog.
Oh my gosh, you serious?
Yeah, yeah. Google him or YouTube him. Yeah, listen
Yeah.
to like anything in the last 5 or 6 years. He sounds like Kermit the Frog.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Yeah, I watched
He's
that
been like
Val.
he's been laying low because of that.
I watched this Val Kilmer documentary. You remember Val Kilmer, Tombstone?
Yeah, yeah. The Doors movie, man. I love that movie.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's basically had throat cancer and he like lost all his ability. I think it was throat cancer, but lost all of his ability to talk,
Oh
and
man, that
just
sucks.
what his life is like with that. And so you just wonder, like, no matter how much money you have and stuff like that, like when you get to that spot where you just, even if you're smart here, but you lose your fastball, no matter the ability to communicate is what keeps you sharp.
Yeah, yeah.
It's sad. But anyhow, so we've gone full circle. My vantage point, this is just my prophetic word, is that Google's going to come in like a sledgehammer.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
Even if it's not, even if it's not like right now, I think they will come back. But
Yep.
dude, they didn't lay their full hand on the table yet.
No. Yep.
There's stuff, there's tricks up their sleeve.
And it doesn't have to be one-to-one to ChatGPT. It doesn't. Like you can still create this really AI-driven model, but you're the API of choice. And the API of choice is probably where you're going to make more money than just giving this ubiquitous chat model to the world. Like what the
Yeah,
consumer has, there's a business-to-business play that if they win the business-to-business play, they'll actually win the game because unless ChatGPT gets a ton of $20 subscriptions, it's going to be really hard to compete with the business-to-business play of just opening up the
yep.
API.
The other thing with Google that's always struck me is like a crapload, like a large percentage of their revenue is all ads. And like they did start to open up other channels that have started to become meaningful,
Yep.
like Google Cloud Platform, and I guess Workspace is rolled up into that, and then
Hmm.
like the Android Google, like basically the Play Store revenue.
Yep.
So there is other channels that are starting to create
Hmm.
revenue, but still like Google and YouTube and display network ads are like the overshadowing part of their revenue, and like the number of products they have. I mean, they have hundreds and hundreds of products,
Yep.
and they've tried a lot of things. Like they had the Google search appliance back in the day. Like there's all these different things they try,
Hmm.
but they still have not monetized anything at the level that
Yeah.
Google Ads has
I
been
know.
able to achieve.
Oh no. It's just such a stranglehold on search. And so,
Yeah,
it's just, it's like a trillion searches a day. If you're making a penny off of every single one of them,
sure they
it's
make a lot
hard
more
to,
than that probably.
I know. I'm just trying to use an analogy
Yeah, is
here.
there a
Like,
trillion searches a day?
I don't know. I'm just,
Yeah, that's a
we're at
big
the end of
number.
we're at the end of our rope. It's a big number.
I'm curious. I'm gonna Google it. How
Yeah.
many searches on Google per day? Well, it's 8.5 billion. That's a lot, man.
That's a lot, right?
Yeah,
And then how much do they make per search if they were to, is there a net?
let's find out. Yeah,
Yeah.
how much does Google make per search? Well, they didn't give me an answers box for this one, but according to Quora, one guy says a fuck ton.
Oh, okay. Then that's the answer.
Roughly 27 cents per search.
Jeez.
That doesn't seem right though.
No, it
There's
does
8
not.
billion. I mean,
No,
what's the math on that? 8
no,
billion.
that's way too high.
Yeah, 8 billion. Doing calculator math here. So 8.5 billion times 27 cents. So that would be 2.3 billion per day times 365 days. That would say their revenue is like $837 billion per year, which that's not their revenue. Their market cap, I don't even think is that high.
I don't think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just looking up
anyway.
something. I was just looking up something while you were doing that. Is that just the App Store alone for Apple, and I'm sure that the Google Play Store is similar. Says that if Apple's App Store grossed more than $85 billion in 2022. All right. So it's one of those things that how many companies, if the Apple just shed its App Store, just made it its own separate entity, it's still one of the most profitable companies probably on the planet, just their App Store. So I'm sure that Google Play Store is probably close to that number.
Yeah, I
Right?
think so.
So
Yeah, I think it's like in the mid, like it's in the tens of billions.
yeah, that's crazy, right? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, and that's these new stores they're popping up everywhere. Like for example, I'm part of SEMrush. They have an SEMrush store. They have a HubSpot store. It's like all of these SaaS platforms. Once you get big enough and you get rolling enough, you make just as much money in the APIs and the other companies that want part of your party. It's just yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
you would know.
Shopify has one. Yeah.
Shopify and stuff like that.
I didn't know SEMrush has one. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to think of like SaaS businesses that can be quick plugins, and there's this strategy that is really interesting where you find an up and coming platform like like a SEMrush or like a Shopify or something. Shopify is a little late at this point, but you find one of these platforms that just opens up an app store that
Yep.
you know is going to take off and just be the first in the app store, like
Yeah.
be one of the first
Yep.
players in the app store.
Yeah. And I have witnessed that. I've witnessed that firsthand.
Speaking of which, anytime you hear of a new app store, let me know. Just shoot me a text.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, seriously.
Maybe we can collaborate on something.
I know. It's pretty funny too, because I'm sure, and I don't know this for sure, but whatever you built in store number one, right? It's pretty from a patent standpoint or something like that, it's probably owned in store number one. But if I just cloned what you did and just put it into 3 other platforms,
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's one of those things where you can own the rights in every single store. Maybe it's just how your patents work, but it's almost like you show your hand in too small of a store, someone else can just clone it and put it in other stores and make up the ground. It's interesting.
One more, and then we can close it. I know a guy who. Do you remember iGoogle when that was
Yeah.
out? So I know a guy who built. He like when iGoogle first came out, he's like, oh, I just want to like see what it takes to build one of these widgets. So he built a widget that was basically a Amazon search, and he just plugged it into the Amazon affiliate thing, and launched an iGoogle widget that was just an Amazon search. So you could put Amazon search on your Google homepage, and he was one of the first people to build an iGoogle widget, and it took him 3 hours or something, like 2 or 3 hours on a weekend to code it and launch it.
Wow, how much?
And then he like forgot about it, and then like a couple weeks later started getting emails that he has like $50,000 in affiliate credits in like his Amazon store. So he was like cranking. It was making like tens of thousands of dollars. I don't think it ever got to six figures in a month, but it was doing tens of thousands of dollars per month in Amazon affiliate commissions.
That's so
and it just kept growing and growing, and then eventually iGoogle shut down. Like Google shut down iGoogle, and then it just all evaporated overnight.
Oh, that's tough. I had a guy.
But it went for like 3 or 4 years.
I had a guy on my podcast named Jay Baer. He's a best-selling author. You know that name? Big in the marketing world. Anyhow, he's so early to the game that domain names actually used to be free, and he bought Budweiser.com, and he sold it to Budweiser for guess how much? He sold it to
$5 million.
6 cases of beer.
6 cases of beer. Holy shit, dude. That's hilarious.
I mean, it might have been more than 6, but still.
Oh my God, that's hilarious, man. I'm going to tell someone that.
I know.
That's good.
So I tried to get into those domain games, and I was looking at movies. And so they had X-Men, and then they had X-Men 2 came out, and the domain name was called X-Movie 2. And then they had X-Men 3 come out, and it was called X-Movie 3. So I bought X-Movie 6. And so they went all the way up to 5, and guess what they did with number 6?
What'd they do?
They rebooted the freaking franchise, so it was X-Men First Class.
Dude, probably because you're squatting on the domain
I
name,
got
man.
my spot. I was waiting, and they rebooted. I was like, "You gotta be kidding me!"
They're probably like, man, this asshole is going to try to extort us for like
Oh
$1
my God, I
million.
would have.
So,
I would have been like, yeah, I would have gone really high, real high. Yeah.
Oh
Oh my
man.
gosh, so small. Yep, small world. All right, man. Well, let's wrap this thing up. So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us, watching two seasoned marketing and technology veterans just talk an hour of randomness. But I hope you enjoyed it. Brian, if individuals if people that are listening to this wanted to hear about more from you, what are your handles? Talk a little bit about Curotech. How would they reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Curotech, Curotech.com. That's my software development agency. But mainly, if you want to hear more from me, check out my podcast, Cashflow Podcast. It's spelled CACHE, cashflowpodcast.com. You can check us out on Spotify. We got Apple, Google Podcasts. All the major YouTube, all the major podcast platforms.
That's great. That's great. Well, you have to come back. This is probably the easiest hour of my life. When did we plan? What did we plan? We're going to talk about this for like 2 minutes before you got on, and we're just like, all right, let's just wing it.
Exactly.
Anyhow, to our listeners, do all the standard stuff, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this video. What I wanted to do now is share something with you that we believe is very special. We call it the Farotech unique process. What you'll see on this page is our entire roadmap that we've built over the last 21 years. We've implemented this process for nearly all of our inbound marketing clients. And we believe that if you implement some of these strategies into your own marketing, you're going to have tremendous results. We developed this page to not only be in video format, but also in text and chapter format as well. Now, when it's done effectively, this process is going to help your organization systematically generate leads, nurture leads into clients, and then convert those clients into raving fans of your products and services, and also your mission and value. If you have any questions or comments about anything that you've read or seen in the previous video, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us and we'll have one of our specialists walk through this with you step by step. You can do that by reaching out to us at info@farotech.com. So once again, the domain to find our unique process is www.farotechuniqueprocess.com. Thank you.